Elias pushed through the northern slope, hood pulled low, collar stiff against the wind, his grip on the reins tight, like he was holding on to the last thread of order in a world gone crooked. But what he saw beneath the fallen tree didn't belong to any order at all. A body, small, misshapen, nearly swallowed by the snow. Long black hair matted with blood, and two braids that once were neatly tied now tangled, wild, like the world had forgotten how to be gentle with her. Elias slowed. His hand found the butt of his rifle out of habit, the kind a man learns when he's lived too long close to death. But it wasn't instinct that brought him to his knees. It was something older than that, something that made his hand tremble as it touched her shoulder, as if he were laying it upon something sacred that was slipping away. Montana, winter of 1877. The winter wind in Montana didn't come like a stranger. It returned each year, punctual as taxes, as funerals. No howling, no clawing, just slipping through the wooden slats like a reminder. Sometimes, the quietest things are the ones that swallow you whole. Elias Mercer lived in a cabin the color of ash, not because he chose it, but because it was what was left. His wife, Clara, had passed 3 winters ago, taking with her every softness that once filled the place. Her laugh, the faint scorch marks on the bread she used to bake, the warmth of hands that knew just where to tug on his shirt each morning. When she left, the wind started speaking louder, and Elias learned how to speak less. Folks said Elias was hard to talk to, but truth was, he was just hard at starting. He knew horses better than most within 30 miles of the valley, could mend a fence straighter than any hired hand, and could hush his daughter's tears by holding her close, saying nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. Josie, 6 now, understood that. She didn't ask about her mama anymore. Hadn't cried out loud since she turned 5. But each night, when Elias blew out the oil lamp and stepped out of her tiny room, he could still hear her shifting beneath the quilt, soft as wind, as if she was trying not to bother him with her sorrow. Clara's wool glove still hung on the door, faded beige, a small tear at the thumb. Elias had thought to take it down once or twice, but his hand hadn't touched it since the day they laid her out. It hung there like a witness, or a tenderness that hadn't yet dried. Mornings began early. Before dawn, the ashes in the stove were stirred. Elias brushed snow from the porch roof, his hands cracked like winter soil. He boiled water, brewed coffee too strong, and poured a splash into Josie's chipped tin cup. Not much was said. Josie chewed on a cold corn biscuit, her small legs swinging from the chair. Sometimes, Elias felt like the leftover of someone else's story, a chapter folded too soon. Every night when he put Josie to bed, he read her a few lines from a book with a torn cover, the one Clara used to read. His voice came out rough, uneven, but Josie listened. Not for the tale, but because it was the last way her mother still lived in that house, besides the black and white photo resting above the hearth. One afternoon, while he was sawing down the leg of a rotted chair, Josie brought him a cup of warm water. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, staring at the wood at his back. Elias looked up. "This one was Mama's," Josie said, pointing to the chair. Elias nodded, his gaze lingering not on her, but on the unfinished cut. Josie placed a hand on the wood, small, thin fingers. "I can't remember her smell anymore," she said. Elias swallowed hard. He bent back to the sawing, not because the chair couldn't wait, but because he had no words for that. Smell was the easiest thing to lose and the hardest to bring back. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Not fierce, not quiet. Just enough to cover old footprints and start something unnamed, something new. The storm didn't arrive with a roar, just a crooked gust, then a strange shudder in the belly of the earth. Elias pulled his hood low, collar up, gripping the reins like the last thread of order left in a world tilting sideways. Snow fell sideways, too. None of that gentle, pretty kind from campfire stories. This kind struck the cheek like a lash. A few horses in the barn lowered their heads, hooves tapping in anxious rhythm. Wind scraped the fences like it was speaking a language no one was left to answer. He crossed the back clearing, skirting the north ridge where the tree had fallen last spring. That stretch of fence was a favorite for the horses to break through. That's when he saw it. A shape against the white. Not branch, not beast. Dark, twisted, like someone had fallen asleep in the wrong position. Elias slowed, hand drifting to the rifle out of habit. Beneath the dusting of snow lay a body, small, unmoving, a woman, black hair, long, once braided, now matted and bloodied. Her skin so pale it blurred the line between the living and those already left behind. One leg was bent under her, blood frozen in thick patches across her deerskin trousers. He didn't remember when he knelt, only the feeling, his hand pressing to her shoulder, like touching cold ash. The chill made his knuckles twitch, but deeper than that, something hollow opened wide in his chest. Still, she didn't stir. Elias turned her over with the practiced motion of a man who'd handled frozen carcasses on a slope. But this wasn't a deer. She had a face, high nose, hollow cheeks, eyes shut. A faint bruise bloomed at her throat, like someone had tried to hold her back and failed. At first came caution. An indigenous woman out here meant trouble. Dry Fork didn't need much excuse to fire at a native girl. Elias knew that. But something older pushed in after. The memory of Clara's eyes during her final fever, closed and darkening like dusk come too early. There was no good reason to bring this woman back, but his arms still folded around her, lifting her like something no man should be asked to leave behind. He bent low, heaved her against him, arms trembling from cold and weight. She was lighter than he expected, but not easy. Nothing on the edge of dying ever is. Elias moved through snow like a sleepwalker. The wind punched his face in waves. He could barely hear his own breath, sometimes sharp, sometimes thick like spring river water. By the time he stumbled onto the porch, his legs buckled. The door flew open. Josie stood there, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something Elias couldn't quite name. But she didn't scream, didn't speak, just stepped aside, letting him in, and closed the door with hands small as dried leaves. They laid the woman on Elias's bed, the only other bed besides Josie's. She lay there, clothes soaked, blood seeping from her thigh, hair stuck to her face like wet grass. Elias pulled her boots off first. Her feet were scraped, swollen from cold. When he touched the wound at her leg, thin blood began to run again. Slow, steady, like it refused to believe she was already leaving. He turned to Josie. "Hot water," he said, "and clean cloth." The girl nodded and ran to the water barrel. Her hands trembled, but not a drop was spilled. Elias wasn't a healer, but he had sat through Clara's final fever. 3 days of watching death inch forward. He knew how to clean a wound, how to pack comfrey on swelling, how to steep tea from willow bark. He cut her pant leg with his knife. The wound was deep, wood lodged in flesh. He frowned. Clara once said, "Take out everything foreign, or it'll kill slower than any wolf." The gash at her head ran long, swollen, but not sunken. Elias wiped away the blood and pressed clean cloth to her brow. Her skin was river rock cold, but he didn't flinch. Josie stood behind him, holding the second cloth. She didn't look at the woman, just at her father. By nightfall, the stranger had not stirred. Elias didn't sleep. He sat in his wooden chair, eyes never leaving her face. Part of him wondered if he'd just brought a storm into a house already weather-beaten. But then he heard Josie breathing from the next room, steady, calm. And he realized the house wasn't quiet like before. There was a third breath now, something new pressing on the rafters. Not danger, presence. By morning, as light crept through the cracks in the shutters, he saw the woman's hand twitch, just slightly. A while later, her eyes opened, dark, deep, wild with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, but Elias raised a hand, speaking slow. "It's all right. You're safe. You were hurt." She didn't understand much English, he could tell. She said something soft and fast in a language he didn't know, something that sounded like water running under ice, a sound the earth might know, but not men. Josie, clutching her old cloth doll, stepped forward. She said nothing, just held the doll out toward the woman. The girl looked, eyes wary, but then, very gently, she reached out and brushed the doll's hand, then nodded, a nod without words. By midday, Elias found a cloth in the pouch slung at her side, reddish-brown, stitched with a silver-threaded moon. He washed it clean and hung it by the stove. Josie asked, "Is that hers?" Elias nodded. "Looks like a flag," she said. "A flag for someone who don't got one." It hung there for 3 days, still as the first flag of spring. No one touched it, but each time Elias looked up from his chair, or Josie entered the room, their eyes brushed past it, like it carried a silent promise. They had taken someone in, and whatever it meant, they wouldn't take it back. Aiyana didn't know much English, just enough to manage the basics. But she knew how to keep a fire burning low and smokeless. She knew how to sew stitches so fine Elias had to rub his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing wrong. She knew how to fold a blanket so its edges met like lips in a whispered prayer. She didn't say a word when she saw Elias trying to mend the hem of Josie's dress with thread too coarse and stitches wandering like a flooded river. She simply watched, then reached out her hand and waited. Elias hesitated, then handed her the dress and the needle, without a word. 10 minutes later, the dress lay across her knees, the tear sewn shut with small, steady stitches, tight as healed cracks in stone. Josie sat beside her, cloth doll in one hand, the other propping up her chin. She followed every movement. When Aiyana snipped the final thread, Josie smiled. A rare smile. Not loud, not strange, just soft as snow settling on a tin roof. Elias heard it from out back, where he was chopping wood. That sound stopped his hand mid-swing, not because he was overcome with emotion, but because he'd forgotten that sound had ever existed in their house. Aiyana asked for nothing, demanded nothing. But the kitchen no longer smelled of old ash. Elias's stew, once bland and smoky, now held a hint of something else, slightly sour, enough to surprise the tongue. Aiyana gathered wild leaves near the forest edge, things Clara never let Elias touch. Josie learned how to weave rings from dry grass, how to braid her hair into 3 even strands with no knots, how to hum a tune Aiyana called Summer in the Snow. No one knew the words, but the melody felt like earth breathing after rain. Aiyana didn't laugh out loud. But one day, when Elias misplaced the kettle and scorched the corner of a wooden spoon, She looked at him, shook her head, and her lips curved. Not a full smile, just the edge of one, tilted slightly, as if it belonged to her alone. Elias didn't know what to do with that look. He glanced away, but all through supper he couldn't shake the crease it left in his memory. Even the light in the kitchen had changed. No longer yellow and uneven, no longer flickering across the ceiling like mischief. It stood still, steady, warm. The kind of light born from someone tending the flame for more than just survival. Elias noticed this one evening, returning late after fixing the chicken coop gate the wind had blown loose. When he opened the door, the storm howled behind him like it was chasing an unsaid word. But inside, embers glowed, stew simmered. Josie slept curled at Aiyana's feet, and she was sewing a pair of gloves. His gloves, torn 2 winters ago. But peace doesn't sit still. Not in Montana. Not in a house full of quiet things people like to whisper about. A week later, Elias stopped by Boone's forge to pick up the horseshoe nails he'd ordered before New Year's. Boone, usually welcoming, barely glanced up before going back to hammering. "Heard you've got company," Boone said, not meeting his eyes. Elias didn't respond. Boone continued, "Native girl, right?" Elias nodded, slow. "She was hurt. I wasn't about to let someone die out in the snow." Boone said nothing more, but the way his hammer landed, shorter, heavier, sounded more like striking wood than iron. Word spread. It didn't need telling. In Dry Fork, a glance was enough to become gospel. Some said Elias was keeping a red woman in his house, like some debt he didn't remember borrowing. Others claimed she was an omen, harbinger of something yet to come. And then there were men like Silas Ward, who owned half the Southern Valley, who began asking questions. "You notice smoke coming from the Mercer place more often? Anyone else hear strange singing from the tree line?" Dry Fork never needed truth, just an excuse. Elias heard those whispers riding back on the wind, not directly, but loud enough to know the warmth inside was becoming a thorn outside. He didn't speak of it to Aiyana, but she felt it. Her hands gripped cloth tighter when she worked. Her eyes lingered on the mountains longer each dusk. One day, Josie handed her a new scarf and watched as she stitched her name into it, in white thread on old indigo. "Aiyana," Josie spelled out, slow and careful. Aiyana looked at her, then nodded. Not to confirm her name, but to affirm something bigger, something silently growing in that house, even as someone outside tried to crush it. That night, Elias sat long by the hearth. The door was bolted. Wind howled against the roof. But inside, the fire burned steady. Josie slept soundly, and Aiyana blew gently on a mug of willow bark tea. Elias didn't look at her, but for the first time in days, he spoke. "If they ask, I'll say I chose." Aiyana looked up. Her eyes reflected firelight. She didn't understand all the words, but enough. She nodded, quietly, like a needle slipping through cloth. Dry Fork wasn't much of a town, just a scatter of leaning houses, an unfinished church, and Luther Mays's general store, where you could buy anything from lead bullets to carrot seeds, cough syrup to the freshest rumors. It was where Elias Mercer had no choice but to go on Saturday, with the salt block nearly gone and Josie's medicine jar down to its chalky dregs. He rode alone. The road from the ranch to town was iced over, each hoofbeat sounding like iron on a coffin lid. Elias's coat was smeared with dry earth, his hand clutching a crumpled shopping list, once penned neatly by Clara, now just a memory of ink fading in a drawer. Mays's store was warm, thanks to a coal-burning stove. Elias stepped inside and nodded by way of greeting. A few men by the leather goods rack stopped talking when he entered, though their eyes didn't. "Mercer," Mays said, flipping a page in his ledger. "You still owe me $3 from October." "Add it to next month," Elias answered, setting the salt on the counter. He was reaching for a tin of stomach powder and an old jar of honey when Silas Ward walked in, along with the stench of tobacco and a kind of power no one gave him, but everyone feared. Tall, broad-shouldered, Silas spoke with the weight of rain-soaked earth. He never wasted words. Didn't have to. "Fine day for riding, isn't it?" Silas said, blocking the aisle. Elias nodded. "I needed salt." "Heard you've got company at your place." Silas's tone didn't ask. It confirmed. Elias stayed quiet. "Native girl," Silas continued. "Run off from one of the camps? Or maybe she's a northern spy, I don't know. She was hurt. I wasn't about to let someone die in the snow." Elias spoke the sentence like he'd worn it down, repeating it in his head. "Death's not the worst thing a person can bring with them," Silas said, voice low and snapping like a guitar with a busted string. "Disease, madness, mixed blood." A few men snorted. Others stared at their boots. Silas leaned in, breath thick with cheap whiskey and warped righteousness. "You keep her there, Elias, and don't expect this town to look the other way. All it takes is one spark, and the forest burns. I won't be repeating myself." Elias met his gaze, said nothing, just laid the medicine tin on the counter, paid, and walked out. The ride home brought no snow, but the wind cracked at his collar like a rawhide whip. Elias didn't think, just held the reins tighter. His horse snorted, skittish, as if it too smelled trouble on the breeze. When the roofline crested past the trees, he saw smoke curling steady from the chimney. Thin, straight, tinged with wet wood. His house was still a house. For now. Aiyana was rinsing her hands at the water trough when he stepped in. Josie napped. Sunlight slanted through the west window, glancing off her wrist, where a crescent-shaped scar rested, pale as an old vow. "Something wrong?" she asked, her voice uncertain but clear. Elias sat down, removed his hat, and set it on the table. "The town knows," he said, "and they don't like it." Aiyana looked down, quiet, then lifted her gaze. "I can go." Elias tightened both hands in his lap. "No one's making you." "But you're afraid." "Yes. For me. For my daughter. For me. For everything." Silence. The fire popped. A coal split open. When Josie stirred, her hair still bearing the dent of a pillow, eyes foggy as muddied creek water, she wandered into the kitchen. She saw Elias and Aiyana sitting quiet, felt the string drawn too tight between them. She walked over, wrapped her arms around Aiyana's waist, pressed her face into her blouse. "Don't let them take you from me," Josie whispered. Aiyana froze. So did Elias. Then, gently, Aiyana lowered her head, touched her cheek to Josie's hair, and closed her eyes. A wordless yes, that night. Elias pulled Clara's old guitar from the chest at the foot of the bed. One string was snapped, the frets worn down. He meant to hand it to Josie, but the girl shook her head. "Give it to her," she said. Aiyana hesitated, then accepted. Her fingers traced the strings like they might dissolve. Then she strummed. No tune, just 3 notes. But they made the wooden walls hum, made Elias close his eyes. And remember something that didn't hurt. No one slept well that night. But for the first time, they stayed awake together, not for fear, but for something unnamed, something stitching shut the smallest tears in that house. With hands, with strings, with the embrace of a child. Before the sound of hooves broke from the tree line, Elias already knew. Not by instinct, by the kind of knowing that comes from living too long with things that never needed saying. The ground beneath the barn trembled, faint as the heartbeat of a wild animal catching the scent of blood. Elias lifted his head, hand tightening on the hose handle, ear tipped toward the wind. It wasn't the wind that changed, but the silence unraveling beneath it. A group, heavy, not hunters, not neighbors. In the small kitchen, Josie was folding paper cranes from brown wrapping she'd salvaged, something Aiyana had taught her. The fire was still burning, not for warmth, but because Aiyana believed a fire still burning meant the house was still alive. Elias stepped inside without a word. Didn't wash, didn't remove his boots, just reached for the old shotgun hanging on the wooden peg. He didn't look at anyone, but Aiyana stopped tending the fire and looked up. Their eyes met, like two rivers crossing backward. No words, all understanding. She knew, and she didn't step away. The wind scraped across the roof, carrying with it the scent of horse, of hide, of old gunpowder that never quite left. When Elias stepped onto the porch, the riders had drawn close. 6 men, none of them here to talk. Silas Ward rode in front, shoulders like low hills, eyes hard as a winter sky without snow. Beside him, Jasper Brigg wore his usual half-smirk, like he meant to bite down on anything he didn't understand. They both looked at Elias the way a man looks at someone who's broken a rule without asking first. They'd once shared hunting fires, but they hadn't come today to remember. Elias stepped forward, one hand resting on the gun barrel, not raised, not hidden. He stood in the space between cold wind and the door left cracked behind him. He knew Aiyana was there, knew Josie's face was pressed to a gap in the wood. Silas spat into the dirt. "We've come to take back what don't belong here," he said. Elias didn't frown, didn't growl. "What is it then? Land? Number that woman in your house. She don't belong in these parts. Not with us. Not among our children." Jasper cut in, voice sharp as a blade slicing a feed sack. "Here she can't speak proper English. Now she's mumbling like some ghost of the old woods. Don't folks in Dry Fork got the right to be concerned?" Elias drew a long breath, not to calm fear, but to still the heat. A slow, ember-deep kind of anger. He looked at each man. Only Clancy, old man with the wooden leg, didn't meet his eye. Clancy had once told Elias about the son he lost to frost up in the hills, the one no one went searching for. Clancy knew solitude. He also knew the shape of gratitude. No one else spoke, until the door creaked open behind Elias, lightly, like a breath loosed by the wind. Aiyana stepped out. No cloak, just a worn brown dress, hem frayed. Her hair was braided clean, eyes steady. Her old boots sat by the door, wet but rooted. She walked up the steps like someone who'd lived there all along. "I take nothing," she said, voice quiet but clear. "I only have myself." The words landed in the air like a single note sung at a funeral. Silence. Then Jasper barked, "She understands us now?" What else did she learn? How to trick lonely men. Elias answered, voice low as an axe splitting old wood. She learned when no one else would speak to her. And sometimes, eyes speak more than words. Silas still hadn't drawn his gun, but his body had tensed. "If you stand in our way today, Elias, don't be surprised when we come back with something stronger than words." That's when Josie burst through the door, too fast for anyone to stop. She ran straight to Aiyana, small hand wrapping around the woman's weathered fingers. "You're home to me." Josie said. No one moved. No one mocked. The wind spun through the pine limbs. Then Clancy cleared his throat. All turned. He adjusted his stance, wooden leg creaking, and looked, not at Elias, but at Aiyana. I lost my boy that first winter. No one held him. No one stitched his coat shut. Elias did what I once prayed someone would do for my own. Doesn't take blood to protect life. And if we forget that, then we've already lost what made us human. His words fell like cooled ash, but they left a mark. Silas turned his horse, said nothing, but his stare was a warning. Jasper cursed under his breath, kicked mud, and followed. The others turned too, silent. Only Clancy moved slow, and before he went, he dipped his head to Aiyana. A small thing, but it carried the weight of truth. Elias shut the door behind them, hand still on the shotgun. Aiyana sat on the porch step. Josie nestled beside her, fingers still locked in hers. Elias looked at them, then at her boots, next to Josie's. One larger, worn, stained with mud, one smaller, cleaner, but both pointed the same direction. He sank down beside them, forehead to knees. Let out a long breath, not sharp with fear, but full of earth, of smoke, of people. You all right? He asked, voice nearly broken. Only afraid for you and the girl, Aiyana whispered. Elias didn't reply, but his hand, for the first time, rested atop hers, light, but enough to say, they won't take you from me. Outside, the sky darkened, but inside that house something had just turned bright. Not from firelight, but from the way three people sat and didn't need to say anything more. Winter didn't retreat in a single night. It faded like old ink, washed thin through morning mist, melting from the eaves one layer of ice at a time. And then one morning, Elias noticed. The crows were flying lower. The scent of earth had begun to rise from under slushy snow. Not warm yet, but cold no longer owned everything. Just like Aiyana. She was no longer the one taken in, no longer the stranger. No one said it outright, but the signs were louder than words. She hung her coat beside Elias's, stacked firewood the way Clara used to, touched Josie's forehead each morning, as if to make sure the girl was still whole after the long sleep of dreams. Aiyana showed Elias how to recognize wild medicine plants around the edge of the woods. She didn't speak much, just held up a branch, traced the veins of the leaf, pressed a hand lightly to her lower belly as if to say, "This, for pain." Elias nodded. He wasn't good at remembering names, but he remembered the way her hand moved when she touched a leaf. When they repaired the roof, it was Aiyana who found the leak, by listening to the faint dripping near the corner shelf. Elias handed her the mallet. She didn't hesitate. Josie stood below, offering nails. 3 people, 1 roof, 1 rhythm. Josie's favorite hour was afternoon, when western light slanted through the window, lighting the wall where Aiyana had started to draw with charcoal. Round little birds, a hornless deer, a tree with roots stretching down to the floor. This is the Lakota tree, Aiyana explained, her voice halting. Each root is a person in the home. Josie pointed to a short one. That's me. Then to a long root, broken midway. That's my mama. Aiyana nodded, didn't smile, but her eyes softened, like blades of grass soaked in evening dew. She taught Josie how to whistle to birds. At first, it was just wind pushed wrong, but one day, a gray-capped sparrow landed on the edge of the porch. Josie's mouth fell open, part fear, part wonder. They made bracelets from deer hide. Josie learned slowly. Each time the thread tangled, she scowled like an old soul. Aiyana didn't fix it for her. She waited, watched the girl work it out. When it was done, the bracelet bore a spiral pattern. Josie called it the River of Two People. Aiyana wore it on her own wrist. One day, Josie handed her the bracelet again. "You keep it. I know you'll keep it safe for me." Aiyana nodded, not because she understood every word, but because she understood what it meant when someone handed you a part of themselves. Elias, standing by the window, felt the air in the house still, like a lake just after the thaw. Every week, Aiyana added one more mark to the wall. Elias never asked why, but he began bringing home extra charcoal, left near the hearth without a word. One evening, after Josie was asleep, Aiyana shaded in the eye of the first bird she drew, darker now, deeper, and, Elias knew, it was the mark of someone who had seen and been seen. She told stories, too, not with words, but with signs. A circle for the sun, 2 lines for the river, a short curve for someone seated. Josie learned the symbols like letters from a language that didn't need sound. And when Elias looked at the wall, he didn't see drawings. He saw a journey. One morning in early March, Elias called Aiyana out behind the barn. He didn't say much, just pointed to a rotted branch that had fallen overnight. "Danger," he said, then offered her the mallet. She climbed up slow but steady. He held the ladder. The wind pushed her hair back, revealing the slant of her neck and the worn leather tie that held her braid. Elias looked up, not to check, but because he wanted to see. When she stepped down, her heel caught on a rung. Elias reached to steady her, his hand brushing her ankle. She flinched, then stayed still. Their eyes met, closer than ever before. Aiyana didn't look down. Elias didn't step back. And something in the air cracked. Not like fire, but like the first sound ice makes when it finally begins to shift. Later that day, while Elias was sawing wood near the barn, Aiyana brought him a cup of warm root tea. She held it out, but he didn't take it right away. He wiped his hands on his trousers first, then reached. Let his fingers brush hers. Her hand was warm, not from sun, but from the simple fact that, since staying, those hands no longer held the cold of someone always ready to leave. "Thanks," Elias said, the word clear and careful. Aiyana didn't respond, but her lashes trembled, like wings settling after a long flight. That house was still made of wood, of ash, of cracked boards and untended walls, but inside there were 3 people and 3 breaths. Silence wasn't a wound anymore. It was soil, where things with no name had begun to grow. Elias sat on the porch steps, holding a wooden flute Clara had once tucked away in a soft cloth, hidden at the bottom of a chest, like something she never got the chance to use. He never knew she could play. And now, as he pressed the flute to his lips, he wasn't sure he could play either. But Aiyana whistled every morning. Not songs exactly, just short, broken calls, like birds calling across the woods. Elias had come to expect them, then missed them when they didn't come. So he brought the flute outside and began to mimic them, slow, choppy, patient. The way someone threads a needle through something torn and long thought ruined. Beneath the willow, Josie played by herself. Her hair held a single feather, ash gray with a silver sheen, that Aiyana had given her. It had been found at the edge of the stream on a misty morning. Josie called it the feather of the first bird that found its way home. She tied it with braided grass, wearing it tilted to the side like a quiet declaration. She belonged to a new world now. A world where losses didn't need to be erased, but could be remembered in games, in charcoal drawings, in a circle of arms. The wind brushed the willow leaves like a hand over a sleeping back. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. Just the even rhythm of breath. Behind Elias, the cabin roof had been patched. The new planks were still bright, but no longer looked out of place. They settled among the old ones like memories willing to live beside what had changed. Aiyana sat near the hearth, sorting through the herbs she'd dried 2 weeks before. Her fingers worked through each stem as if dividing time itself, some for spring, some saved for when winter came again. There was something in the way she moved, quiet, fully present, that Elias couldn't stop watching. Not because she reminded him of Clara. Aiyana wasn't memory. She wasn't a substitute. When Elias looked at her, he saw a different kind of light, one that didn't intrude on old grief, just reached the places he never thought could be lit again. The afternoon slowed. Sunlight spilled gold across the porch floor. Josie burst into laughter as a squirrel darted across the yard. Aiyana looked up, lips pressing into what might have been a smile. But she didn't speak, didn't need to. Her silence wasn't guarded anymore. It was a presence, full, grounded. Elias blew a note. Wrong. It squealed like wind through an unfinished door. Josie giggled. Elias winced. Aiyana stood and stepped forward, palm outstretched. Flute is to breathe, not to force, she said. Her English was still careful, each word set down like a stone across a shallow stream. Elias handed her the flute. Aiyana lifted it to her lips and blew one short, clean note. It wasn't music, but it was the sound of someone still alive. Elias didn't smile. He closed his eyes. That night, they sat around the worn table. Aiyana set the bowls of soup down. Josie brought the spoons. Elias poured the tea. No one spoke. No one needed to. The clink of metal against bowl, the soft rhythm of wood on wood, like a heartbeat learning its pace again. Outside, night fell like a soft cloth across the rooftop. Inside, the lamp glowed, not harsh, not bright. Just enough to catch a small smile at the corner of Josie's lips, the steady calm in Elias's eyes, and Aiyana's hand resting, unmoving, at the edge of the table. Morning came slow, like sap rising in spring. The light hadn't yet cleared the peaks, but it was enough to make the frost retreat, to draw long hairline shadows on the ground. In the kitchen, water boiled with a quiet murmur. Aiyana was teaching Josie how to brew tea from white birch bark. No rush hand when water talks, she said, pointing to the small clay cup. Wait breath, like bird. Too fast. Bird gone. Josie bit her lip in focus. Her hands were still clumsy, but when she reached for the kettle's handle, they no longer shook. Aiyana didn't touch her hand. She placed her own nearby, close enough for Josie to see, not close enough to take control. The kind of teaching that didn't steal the learning. Later came lessons in folding cloth without fraying threads, in how to crease a shirt like wings tucked at rest, how to test an egg's age in a bowl of water, how to brush hair without breaking too many strands, how to tuck a coal into just the right corner to keep the fire from dying when wind pressed through the walls. By afternoon, they stepped outside. Aiyana showed Josie how to track deer prints through thinning snow, how to tell which direction the doe had gone by the depth of the mark. They followed the trail to the edge of the woods, gathered dry twigs and leaves for salves. Josie asked, "What's this one for?" Aiyana paused before answering, "Not only sickness, for bad dreams." "You had bad dreams too?" Aiyana nodded, not meeting the girl's eyes. "Many. I did too, but not as much now." That answer, plain, unpolished, was, in Aiyana's eyes, the richest gift she'd ever gathered from the woods. That house, once a place that held grief like breath held too long, now it breathed again. Not because it forgot, but because it had been forgiven. If this story stirred something quiet in your heart, leave a comment below. Even a single dot lets us know you're listening. Tap like if you believe broken souls can still find their way to each other. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Echoes, where forgotten hearts are finally called by their true name.